Okay. As we talked about, this is just a quick review. Okay, so the one thing I want to show you is the Schneider air races, in which Schneider and I was amazed myself at how rapidly they went from these rickety-looking fuselages and engines hanging out all over the place.
On the racing circuit, one event, more than any other, came to symbolize the quest for speed. It started at Monaco in 1913. Jacques Schneider, the French Undersecretary for Air, wanted to promote the design of seaplanes. He donated a magnificent trophy for which international teams would compete. After the war, the Schneider Cup became the most coveted prize in aviation. Italy won it in 1920, 21, and Britain in 1922. Then the Americans sent a team of Navy pilots who swept the board, the winner reaching 181 miles an hour. The secret lay in their new Curtiss D-12 engines, which could be cooled by water even at very high power. In 1925, an American Army pilot, James Doolittle, won the trophy. Then the United States government withdrew financial support, leaving the Schneider Cup to the Europeans. The British came up with a new contender, the Supermarine S-5, a new monoplane racer designed by...
Just note how sleek that aircraft is.
The wings were thin,
that early in aviation history.
And it was braced all over.
And the size of the
like
propeller.
We apprentices, who reckoned we knew more than our bosses, looked at that and said, what are all those wires on it? We thought that was all wrong. And then I went to see it on the slipway. And I was highly impressed. Here was this beautiful aeroplane, streamlined, slim. To me, the perfect aeroplane that existed.
Once again, it was engine power which counted.
The sound of the engines was marvelous, of course. Especially on the turns when it came down off the glide with a full power. It really was something that made your blood tingle.
So it was very, very thrilling and exciting. You would see this little dot buzzing along, and the noise of the engine, which was a great roar, came very much reflected off the water, of course, across the Solent, and you could see the airplane was at least half a mile ahead of the sound.
The 1927 race was held in Venice between the Italians and the British. Both teams had new aircraft. The Italian M-52s gradually dropped out with engine problems, leaving two S-5s to romp home. Flight Lieutenant Webster won at 281 miles an hour.
If you know anything about engines, you listen to the sound of that engine. It sounds really great.
To a hero's welcome. Once again, the search for more speed lay in more power. Rolls-Royce took up the challenge. Their R series of engines had many of the features of America's D-12, but they now produce nearly 2,000 horsepower.
Remember, that was 80 years ago, 90 years ago.
Made for the racing to start with. They found they worked fine for 20 minutes or half an hour. But of course that wasn't good enough. We wanted a bit more than that. And eventually they managed to produce at least an hour and a half. Absolute reliable.
I don't know, is it 400 horsepower? Is that what he said? All I know is today at Reno, so many aircraft that size are doing 400 miles an hour. They were doing 300 miles an hour. So in 90 years, they've only gone up that much.
If Britain could win two more races,
I'll ask you why at the conclusion of this.
A national will developed to do so.
People came from all over the place. There were huge crowds on all the beaches. And it was a very exciting business. The amount of technology that went into those airplanes was tremendous. I mean, they really were touching on the sort of limits of aviation possibility.
Britain won the 1929 race. And in 1931, John Boothman ended the saga of the Schneider Cup by winning it outright. Then George Stainforth broke the world speed record at 407 miles an hour.
So the point is that in just a few short years, the amount of speed they went was just incredible. From the end of the rickety airplanes at the end of World War I, with the fabric and the double wings and all the parasite drag and the fragile-looking bodies, all of a sudden winding up with something this sophisticated that, in my opinion, could still hold its own in the Reno air races today. So let's see if we can take a look at another thing. Here's the autogyro. This is kind of an interesting one as well. This is what I told you about, where the gyro itself.
In 1925, a Spaniard,
when he does auto rotation, pay attention to the propeller. It stops, so there's no power being generated by that airplane except the falling, the gravity turning the wings, turning the rotors.
The autogyro.
Well, an autogyro has a rotor, and when the aircraft is moving forward through the air, the rotor acts a little bit like a windmill, where the forward motion of the aircraft moving through the air causes it to rotate. And when it rotates, it again is a rotating wing and is producing lift. But the forward motion of the autogyro is produced by a propeller very similar to what you would have on an airplane.
An autogyro, which wasn't really vertical lift on the takeoff, but vertical lift landing, they could auto-rotate down and with very low ground run, plop down right in front of everybody, and especially at air shows, they would demonstrate that capability.
This method of landing is the same basic approach that a modern helicopter would take should its engine fail. Back in the 1920s, Juan de la Cierva proved to the world that to make a safe landing in a helicopter required no engine power and no runway, just a spot big enough for the aircraft. The key to de la Cierva's stable aircraft was his discovery of a phenomenon that only became apparent with rotary-winged aircraft: dissymmetry of lift. De la Cierva had the same annoying problem that many early helicopter designers had. Their craft would tip over before ever leaving the ground. This happened because most rotor blades at the time were rigid. Rotating blades never generate the same force of lift equally throughout their revolution. This causes an imbalance of lift. De la Cierva's solution? He attached hinges to each blade, which allowed them to move fore and aft, and up and down. This would allow the rotor blades to find their own way through the air.
You see, as the forward-going blade goes into the air, it gets a lot more lift and it wants to rise. And as it rotates around and goes with the air, then it wants to sink. And prior to that, then, most of the aircraft would have rolled over. He allowed the blade to flap up, and as it goes around, then to flap down. If it gets too much lift, it flaps up. As it goes around and loses lift because it's going with the wind, it starts to settle. And so this was a self-accommodating sort of thing. So Juan de la Cierva figured that out and was able to build a controllable, flyable autogyro back in the 20s.
Early autogyros had small wings to help steer the aircraft, but these wings disappeared in the early 1930s when cyclic pitch control was developed. This device was based on the problem that de la Cierva had just solved: dissymmetry of lift. The thought was take control of this imbalance of lift and use it to steer the aircraft.
It wasn't until the cyclic pitch, where we can change the pitch as we go around the blade, so it might go high on this side and low on that side, that people began using cyclic pitch to help control this rotor. And so then, in hovering, where you have no forward flight speed, they were able then to tilt the rotor so as to be able to go laterally, or tilt the rotor so as to go longitudinally.
This is the same basic device that steers a modern helicopter. When the cyclic stick is moved, a device at the base of the rotor hub alters the pitch of each rotor blade individually as it goes through its cycle of rotation. So where the pitch in a blade is greater, it grabs more air and the blade rises higher. Where the pitch is less, the blade swings lower because it has less air to catch on its surface. The overall effect with this system is the change in the rotor plane, which enables directional control. Modern helicopters also have collective pitch control. Simply put, this lever changes the pitch of all the rotor blades evenly or collectively. This way, the pilot can lift off vertically, steer the aircraft, and with the cyclic stick compensate for those forces of unequal lift. Thanks to these new technological breakthroughs back in the 1930s, the autogyro achieved practical success. The Detroit News used one to speed reporters to the scene of major stories. The U.S. Postal Service began test flights for its deliveries. There were even demonstrations held on the White House lawn for President Hoover, who called the autogyro the greatest achievement in aviation. Harold Pitcairn, who was licensed by De La Sierva to build autogyros in the United States, even foresaw a future where autogyros would make automobiles obsolete. He designed a Pitcairn rotable and demonstrated it on the streets of Washington, D.C. The rotable vehicle was all part of Pitcairn's dream, which he depicted in his promotional material, to have an autogyro in every garage.
Well, Harold Pitcairn built some autogyros here in the United States back in the mid-1930s, which was right in the middle of the Great Depression, and nobody really had money for anything at that time. So, unfortunately, the autogyro, combined with its complexity and high cost, never allowed it to actually be that competitive.
The autogyro's fate was sealed when in December 1940, its 41-year-old inventor, Juan de la Sierva, was killed in a commuter airplane accident in London. But by solving many of the autogyro's problems, de la Sierva and his colleagues had opened the way at last for the practical helicopter. The world wouldn't have to wait long. Two men working independently of each other were about to push helicopters into the modern era. On April 22, 1931, Amelia Earhart set a world's altitude record for autogyros at 18,400 feet.
Okay.